aren't from your offices. They, typically aren't from transporting your product. They are embedded into your product and its materials and supply chain. Next. So knowing that, I thought it'd be fun to take a deeper look into a few materials that, or product rather, that might be in your closet and actually see where these emissions are. So here we have a jacket, a shoe, and a stainless steel water bottle. And of course, a caveat, like any data slide, these percentages reflect a general estimate pulled from the best available data that we do have. So they may not directly reflect what's happening in every single product supply chain, but they serve as a good indication of where impacts are happening based on product type. So just taking a look here, you can see in the jacket, clearly it's the material manufacturing, like yarn prep stages and dyeing and finishing, that produce the most emissions for that product. Within footwear, it's clearly manufacturing at 43%. And then with stainless steel water bottle, it's also in that manufacturing and components and assembly. So we see that this is just an important way to slice the data and help companies see where they can prioritize their efforts to get the most bang for their buck, essentially, and also start to recognize that the biggest impact areas are actually the hardest to reach for every single company. And it's in the supply chain. So it's a very complex network. It's difficult to navigate and influence. So once you acknowledge this, it really becomes clear that you really have to work together with your colleagues and other peers across the industry. Next. And this is why we launched the Climate Action Corps. So we heard this exact thing from our members, that this work is too challenging and costly to act on alone. And so we formed this group and announced the Climate Action Corps in January with 15 founding members. And today we're excited to report we have over 60 shown here, with about 20 more in the process of joining. And companies can join at any time. And you can see that we have a broad mix of brands and retailers and suppliers around primarily North America so far. And they produce a broad mix also of apparel and footwear and tents and water bottles and snowboards and even luxury footwear. So it's all over the map. But when we consider the broad mix here of these 60 companies and the 20 that are joining, they actually represent a community of over $10 billion in annual revenue. And we think this is significant because our industry is primarily made up of small to mid-sized companies. So it really helps us gauge that there's power in numbers. Next. And then what do these companies see in the Climate Action Corps? Before they joined, they already recognized that climate poses a growing risk to their business, like unpredictable outdoor seasons, vulnerability in their supply chains, and growing demands from their customers to act and really make progress. So they see that it's not just the right thing to do, it's a business imperative. And they also see that the best tool we have to fight climate change is one another. So collaboration is really the secret sauce of this work. And it's cheaper, faster, and smarter to go up the mountain than alone. So we kind of use this mountain analogy and this trail map to explain the Climate Action Corps journey of measuring your emissions and planning and starting to reduce and share progress over time. Next. So members are, again, at all stages of the journey. Some members are high up that mountain already and others are just getting started. But what members have in common is they commit to these 4 steps of climate action. They measure their entire carbon footprint from headquarters to supply chain. They plan by setting climate targets and building up a company plan to ratchet up action over time. They reduce emissions by taking immediate and ongoing actions to drive down carbon emissions. And then they share progress annually through a simple progress report to drive transparency and accountability. So recognizing that these companies, again, are vastly different when it comes to product type as well as business model, and also the ability and agility to change and varying levels of ambition. We think it's important that companies aren't held to specific requirements within the core, but instead core members receive the guidance and the tools and the trainings that are in line with science and global best practices. So each company has informed recommendations and can decide what's best for them while considering our industry's collective goals, which I'll speak to at the end. Next. And so what we've seen through this past decade of sustainability work, this pre-competitive collaborative work, is that when companies have access to industry-aligned guidance, tools, and trainings, they have the confidence that the investment they're making through their time and their money and their efforts are aligned with the future direction of the industry. And this also lays the groundwork for collaboration and helping ensure we're all speaking the same language. So beyond the guidance, trainings, and tools, which I've already mentioned, Climate Action Corps members also get access to community. Obviously, this opens up the opportunity to lean on each other and ask questions across the aisle and share and test ideas and learn about innovations and really connect with a network of around 150 peers who are also working on these same issues. Of course, now it's online, and hopefully we'll have in-person events around the Outdoor Retailer Show in the future. And then lastly, I think this is the coolest part actually, is we have impact collabs and members get access to these opportunities. So they're targeted collaborations to reduce emissions, like widespread renewable energy procurement in the US, also energy efficiency in shared mills in China, which we're launching this fall into next spring. And then increasing use of recycled content and low carbon materials in our products. So it's essentially a collaborative way for companies to reach their greenhouse gas targets with less time, cost, and effort by working together. And then next, I think this is the last slide here. So how will this collaboration go from here? I just wanted to share like a quick note on some initial goals we set for the industry back in January, which seems like 5 years ago. But this year, our goal was to have at least half of OA membership as defined by dues revenue join the Climate Action Corps. And we're actually about halfway there as of today, which is really exciting and I think worth celebrating, especially with such a challenging year. So a big kudos to all the companies that still made this happen despite what our industry is struggling through with retail and inventory challenges. And then our collective goal by the end of this year is to have all core members have measured their Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, so kind of their offices and their direct impact, set a target and also commit to some level of renewable energy. So that's where we are this year. And then next year, we're hoping to have every member measure all scopes, so their direct operations all the way through their supply chain, set a target, and share their public progress on our website. So stay tuned for that. And then in the coming years, we'll also report measurable progress from our impact collabs that I mentioned each year and produce an industry progress report as well. So hopefully I can come back here next year and share that what we've learned at least and what we've progressed on. And I'm sorry, there's a little fly bouncing around here. We just truly believe that, and I think this panel is such an expression of that we can go further and faster when we're together, especially with climate and circularity. So we're really grateful to be a part of this conversation and hear from the other panelists today. And again, thanks EcoCycle and Recycle Colorado for the chance to speak on this. And it was a pretty fast overview and high level. So if we have time for questions now, I'm happy to take any, or we can save them at the end too.
Thanks, Jessie. Yeah, we do have a couple of minutes. So if people want to submit questions to Jessie specifically, again, please go ahead and use that button down at the bottom of your screen that says Q&A. But I did have a question for you, Jessie. You have some big names on that slide with all those brands. There's a lot of technology that goes into outdoor, like those types of companies. So how do you balance confidentiality and whether or not a business has proprietary information that they're trying to keep to themselves? How do you navigate that with the association and the Conservation Corps?
Yeah, that's a really great question and a constant challenge. I will say that every single training and meeting we start with antitrust guidelines because that's, a first and foremost for this kind of pre-competitive collaborative work. I would say this probably comes up most often in materials specifically or chemistry, for instance. But we do have a number of suppliers, actually material suppliers and chemical suppliers who are part of the Climate Action Corps. And so that's a cool way for companies that may not have the in-house expertise to innovate or the funding to innovate to access innovation in a really efficient way. But for those companies that have in-house opportunities to do that, I think in all respect, what we see most often is that they want the opportunity to share what they've done, at least at a certain point. So maybe they've done a pilot and they have some insight, and even the bigger companies that are trying to innovate and produce a new material likely need other companies to also buy that material to make it worth their while and their cost. And so at a certain point, it usually does make sense to open it up to the industry and invite others in. So it hasn't been a barrier we've seen yet, but we are just within our first year, so we'll see what happens.
Perfect. All right, then Jesse, I think we're actually gonna shift over to Ben. Ben Gelt is the co-founder for the Cannabis Certification Council. Ben, take it away.
Thank you, Kate and Jesse. That was so interesting. I have a couple questions for you when we get to the other side of all the presentations. So again, thank you so much for having me, Kate, and Recycle Colorado, and for including the Cannabis Certification Council in this conversation, and just cannabis in general being part of this dialogue. I think is really exciting, and I'm so honored and privileged to be able to share our perspective and some about our work. So I'm the founder and chairman of the Cannabis Certification Council. We're a national nonprofit. I'm based here in Denver. We have board members all over the country and projects and partners all over the country and across the globe, actually. Our focus is on educating industry and consumer alike about sustainable and clean production. Next slide. Just a brief overview of the organization. Our two focuses, as I said, are talking about clean production and sustainability. I'm going to dive into sustainability a little bit today because that's where we've done a lot of broad-based collaboration with multiple industries and multiple avenues, and actually something that has developed even in the time that we've been planning this panel and doing this work, and I've learned about all these other people's incredible work. We've seen a lot of the work that we've done in the last few years translate into some interesting policy outcomes that I can touch on a little bit here today, but are the direct result of a lot of the collaboration and work that's been done the last several years that's now directly feeding into this rulemaking group that the state of Colorado has created. So we're going to be eliminating a lot of waste in the cannabis industry starting after this year. And a lot of it, again, is directly tied to the work that we've helped do. So projects of note currently, we've built an event called the Cannabis Sustainability Symposium. The industry is kind of known to be a high use industry, whether you're talking water, energy, et cetera. We've worked with the city of Denver for the last 6 years now to build up this event, to bring in sustainable experts, whether it's technology or just best practices, what have you. And it's grown into this wonderful touchstone event in the industry. We also are developing a standard, called organically grown cannabis. For those of you who don't know so much about the cannabis industry, the short version of this is that there are very few quality assurance, quality control standards in place in any given state. Every state has its own unique set of rules and regulations. I'm sure most of you know that it's still a federally prohibited product, particularly marijuana. And as a result, there are no really meaningful baseline standards. So we're developing the organically grown cannabis standard. We're actually just now in a phase of receiving public input and commentary on that standard. So if you go to our website, cannabiscertificationcouncil.org, you can find a draft of that standard there, and please submit your comments. We also are we've been doing a consumer education campaign called What's in My Weed, really in the same line of thinking, helping people connect the dots between how they go to the supermarket and buy organic and cage-free and grass-fed and this, that, and the other thing, and then they go to the liquor store and they buy organic wine and top shelf this, and then they go to the dispensary and they ask for the strongest, cheapest thing they got. So there's this great dichotomy in consumer behavior that is just about the lack of education. And to that end, we've also created an educational series called Happy Plants, which I think is really exciting, helping consumers learn about how to connect with healthy, happy plants in the marketplace. Future priorities include derivatives standards for things like edibles and what have you. People are certainly welcome to follow up with me to get into the details on that. And then also fair trade is something that we intend to create a certification and standard around for cannabis products. Next slide, please. So getting into the sustainability rabbit hole and what this whole conversation is about. And, when Kate and I first talked about, what work is going on in the cannabis industry where you're bringing multiple industries together to talk about common challenges and create common solutions, I immediately thought about the symposium and also the Denver Cannabis Sustainability Working Group. I saw Becky Migas in the audience, and I think one or two others that have been around that group and participated. Hello to those of you. Thank you for being here. The working group was created as a result of the larger Denver Cannabis Industry Stakeholder Committee that I sit on, and frankly suggested that we as industry stakeholders here in one of the principal markets still in the world for cannabis and cannabis regulation ought to be thinking about sustainability, environmental impact, carbon footprint, et cetera. And so we went ahead and created this working group, which has really taken on a life of its own and I saw Susan Renaud in the audience, who's now our partner with the city of Denver that helps us administrate this working group. And we've attracted, and we'll go to the next slide, please, and I can talk about, I think, who we've attracted to that group. Certainly lots of cannabis companies and interests from the industry, and ranging from the biggest brands and players and most well-capitalized groups to lots of mom and pop and really everything in between, which has been very heartening, frankly, to see those larger interests, and I tend not to name names, those larger interests taking time and energy and resources, literally with writing checks and sending their experts and providing expertise to participate in this. We also immediately drew in technology companies that are providing services and equipment and consulting into the industry. We attracted other regulatory bodies. We've had a wonderful partnership with the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. I saw some of those folks in the audience as well. I'm sure they may be familiar with the work. We've also been working with Boulder County and others. There are engineering firms, sustainability experts and consultants. The utility companies have been participating, scientists, energy experts. It's really been this very broad-based group of experts all coming together to talk about how the cannabis industry specifically can help reduce its carbon footprint. Next slide, please. So there are many, many examples of collaboration, including part of what I just talked about earlier with all of this work that's gone on the last 5 years in the working group and talking about plant waste and biomass and packaging and labeling and all the challenges in the supply chain. And, to keep the story short, cannabis is a highly regulated industry when it comes to taxing and controlling. As I already touched on, there are some, I think, deficiencies with dealing with quality control, quality assurance. And one of the other areas where states broadly, not just Colorado, but virtually every state that has been early in adapting either a vibrant medical market where you have a retail element or going full adult use, most of those states were fixated on taxing and controlling the industry, and things like public health, environment, safety, et cetera, have really not been given their due attention. And, again, that was part of the reason for starting the Denver Cannabis Sustainability Working Group, was being part of this broader industry stakeholder group that was looking at all issues affecting the industry here in Denver and saying, this is another area that we need to focus on. And so to wit, and I'm going to come to this page in front of me very shortly, we've been able to take a lot of that energy, a lot of that discussion about, the undue amount of waste. And just to touch on it briefly, there is so much plant matter and biomass that these producers create that doesn't go to market. Think about the stems and stalks, the the outer leaves that don't have any meaningful THC content. And the requirements for all of these companies, and I always tell people looking to get into cannabis that it's a compliance industry. It is a compliance industry before it is an anything else industry. I still don't really believe that it's become a real CPG, consumer packaged good industry, because there isn't the level of brands and product development and other things that you see in some of these other established categories, like some of my peers here on this panel are in. And a lot of that has to do with the strict regulatory guidelines that they're under. And so when you think about all these compliance issues, none of them really have been suited towards sustainability, and again, getting into all this waste. So one of the big things that the state of Colorado is going to be doing starting January 1st next year is allowing all this biomass that currently has to be rendered unrecognizable, which means that it basically has to go to the landfill because there's nowhere else it can go. It's going to suddenly be allowed to be composted, to have anaerobic digestion and all sorts of other things that I don't really technically understand, but that I know will allow for greater reuse, lower waste, et cetera. So that's just another, I think, really wonderful example of the work that we've done feeding into real world outcomes in places that we didn't necessarily expect it to in the way that it did. Now, coming to this screen that we have up in front of us, another example of collaboration that I think is just amazing and has earned a great deal of press attention across the country. Washington Post, Politico, Good Morning America, USA Today, you name it, they've been there, is this wonderful collaboration that came between Earthly Labs, Denver Beer Company, and the clinic that was heavily facilitated by our friends at the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. The short version of this is that CDPHE has been looking at all sorts of ways to help reduce the carbon footprint of the industry. They incubated this project with a board member of ours and another working group member, Legal, which is a vertically integrated cannabis company here in Denver. And then as it got to scale, brought in the clinic and Denver Beer Company. Oh, I'm getting close on time. So let's play the video and they'll talk quickly about what this relationship looks like and what's come of it. Thank you, Kate.
Our goal at Earthly Labs is to create and implement technology that can help us avoid and capture 1 billion metric tons of CO2 from entering our atmosphere. This machine behind me is our CO2 recovery technology that we affectionately refer to as CC.
CO2 is a byproduct of fermentation. The yeast naturally create CO2 as they're metabolizing the sugars and creating alcohol as well.
This machine right now is capturing from an active fermentation in the fermentation cellar over here at Denver Beer Co.
CO2 is captured and it is filtered and processed to create a liquid form,
which then gets delivered to my facilities, and then I'm able to vaporize that, turn it into a gas, and release that into my grow facilities.
And CO2 is essential to photosynthesis, so the CO2 is combined with lighting, and that creates sugars within the plant, and those sugars turn into energy, which helps grow a stronger plant with more yield, a much better quality, and gives us a quick turnaround.
Working with Earthly Labs, the clinic, and the state of Colorado to help put this project together has really taken us and the state down a big step towards reducing the greenhouse gas emissions in Colorado.
Each individual unit can capture up to 100,000 pounds of CO2 annually. That's as much CO2 as 1,500 trees. So instead of putting that CO2 back into the environment, we're now allowing thousands of Colorado's finest plants to absorb this CO2.
We're actually growing our weed from beer burps. So cannabis from beer burps is the way we're rolling. So that's awesome.
These two industries are very much the epitome of Colorado's small independent business, really working together. So we're excited about this partnership.
Just to be able to produce a great beer, great cannabis, and then also reduce the carbon footprint for all our neighbors.
I'm super proud, and I know Earthly Labs as well is proud to be not only working with industry leaders like Denver Beer Co. and the clinic, but to also be working with the state that's so forward-thinking and progressive about how they're going to continue to make this state a beautiful state to visit, to live in, and to be a small business owner and entrepreneur in.
So as you can see, I mean, we helped bring these two, interesting industries together to come up with this collaboration through a third party that is in yet another industry. And to me, that was the most prescient, kind of obvious example of what we've done. Here on this next slide, I talk a little bit about the Cannabis Sustainability Symposium, and down at the bottom, I don't have the sheet of all those beautiful brands, but we do have a lot of brands that are participating. Here are some of the bigger names: Marijuana Business Daily, Boveda, Affluence, which is a $9 billion agricultural company. Ozapram, Wana Brands is the largest edible company in the world, also based here in Colorado. Live Well, Native Roots, many others. Next slide. We've also, as part of what we're doing at the symposium to encourage, collaboration and cross-industry sharing, we always focus on bringing in speakers from other industry to talk about their development in sustainability. A couple of years ago, we actually had John Steer, who's the former sustainability director for what's now the Brewers Association. So we've had a wonderful relationship there. Sorry, I'm talking fast. I just know I'm a little short on time. Next slide, please. And then clean production. I'll just end here. The organically grown cannabis standard is another area where we're collaborating across multiple industries. And the biggest example of that is having a technical advisory committee member from the California Certified Organic Farmers Group, which for those of you in the organic food space will know is one of the kind of leading certifying bodies out there and leading voices regarding organic production and organic development. So we felt it was incredibly important to have a group like that participate in the development, not just the response and the feedback, but they participated formally in the technical advisory committee and the development of the organically grown cannabis standard. So yeah, I think that's it. Next slide. That's it. Questions, comments, concerns? Sorry if I ran over. Thank you for your time.
You weren't talking that fast. I was talking fast at the beginning to give you guys a little bit more time. We did have a quick question about the video and where it can be found. And if you...
It can be found. I'll find it and I'll share it in the chat.
Awesome. We are going to have to move on to the next one, but that'll give everybody time to think of a ton more questions to ask you at the end in that last half hour. So then we are going to Miss Alyssa.
Alrighty, here we go. Well, yeah, thanks so much, Kate, for inviting us. This is my third Recycle Colorado Summit, and every time I just feel like I learn so much and leave inspired and connected to cool new people to collaborate with. So happy to speak on this topic. I would say that all of the successes that I've had thus far in my career are directly tied to collaboration. Actually had a call this morning where someone asked me, how do you do it all? Well, really, I don't have to do it all by myself, and that's what makes things so much more achievable. So excited to share more detail on some of the work that I've done over the past few years. Presently, I am the Director of Operations and the leader of our compostable packaging collaborative at OSC2. And OSC2 stands for Organic Sustainable Community, and we were launched, gosh, I think 13 years ago by a group of really committed CEOs who are trying to find ways to tackle our industry's most difficult problems, whether those are environmental, social, or economic, really trying to find triple bottom line solutions. And when we're thinking about circularity, right, we're thinking about how can we make the most of the resources that we have? The linear model of, utilizing resources and then disposing of them when we're done really doesn't serve anyone. It doesn't serve our communities, the resilience of our supply chains. So we need to find solutions that really internalize that and create a closed loop where we're finding ways to regenerate our communities, regenerate our economy, and transition to something that's truly sustainable and holistic. So for me, I'll be pretty specific about the topic that I'm covering today, which is systems level solutions for sustainable packaging. You know, the benefits of circular packaging go back to what Jesse was talking about around, you know, greenhouse gas reductions and carbon footprints, but also in transitioning away from petroleum-based feedstocks, which, you know, has such an impact on our environment in terms of plastic pollution, and also has an impact on our health as a society. So next. I just wanted to give a quick overview of the issue. I know all of you are here who are members of Recycle Colorado, so I'm sure you understand this already, but you know, packaging touches so much of what we do, and especially in CPG, consumer packaged goods, or the natural products industry that I work in. And our brands take so much time, energy, and money to really support due diligence of ingredient sourcing. You see so many third-party certification standards, the rise of the regenerative organic certification to go beyond our organic platform that was developed in the early 90s, and really trying to think systems level when it comes to how we run our supply chains. One thing that I have started to notice is that brands are taking the same steps that they do with their ingredients portion of their supply chain now with their packaging, because it doesn't really make sense to launch a certified organic, climate neutral, you know, product and wrap it in a single-use plastic that only gets used for 2 seconds and then lives in the environment for kind of forever. So, you know, my background is in agricultural ecology. I have been working in the food industry for the past 6 years. I used to manage sustainability for Justin's Nut Butter, which is actually how I got to meet Kate from EcoCycle, and actually how I was introduced to Recycle Colorado. One of the things that I did there was build from the ground up all of our sustainability programs, including our packaging programs. And as you may be aware, you know, we have those wonderful squeeze packs that are very convenient for on-the-go consumption. You can pack them away very easily when you go camping or go to the airport. But again, that packaging exists far beyond the use of our actual product. So as I started to dig a little bit deeper and realize that there really is no end-all be-all solution for a sustainable package, and you have so many considerations like barrier requirements, consumer messaging, you know, product quality, shelf life stability, you know, all of those are very essential when it comes to designing a package, but the piece that was really missing was sustainability. And I was like, well, there has to be something that we can do to scale more sustainable solutions. You know, you're thinking about a circular model in terms of sustainable design where you start with design, materials, but if you're not thinking about, you know, a diversity of perspective and engaging multiple stakeholders, you're not going to solve the infrastructure problem. You're not going to have your consumers understanding how to really dispose of the materials that you're putting in front of them. So, you know, in terms of this issue, we really need to think about those key facets of, you know, design, material, infrastructure, and communication. Next. But where there is a challenge, there is also an opportunity. So plastic's largest market is packaging, and it does present a unique opportunity, especially for our industry, where we have the scale and we have the resources to collaborate and innovate towards sustainable and actually regenerative solutions. You know, at OSC, one of our members recently did a webinar talking about regenerative packaging. So not only is it compostable, not only is it marine degradable and soil degradable, but they're trying to design, you know, innovate through a lens of sustainability in a way that actually regenerates the soil and creates an end market for compostable packaging. So again, by leveraging this common agenda, shared measurement, stakeholders across our sector can work together to leverage collective purchasing power, advocate for infrastructure reform, make sure we're aligned around our shared messaging to our consumers, and, you know, scale, and this is super important, scale market-driven solutions to reflect the true costs of natural resource use and, you know, leave that positive impact that we're all looking for. Next. So one thing I always like to do when I give a presentation like this is outline some resource partners. Previously, before my time at OSC, I was the executive director of the Sustainable Food Trade Association, who's focused on a systems approach to sustainability management. So they have 11 different action areas, one of which is packaging, where, you know, trying to create resources, toolkits, and avenues, much like Jesse does with OIA, to help these brands progress in a way that they would not be able to on their own. One of the projects of OSC2 and SFTA is the Climate Collaborative. And the Climate Collaborative, again, is a free resource for so many companies to really learn more about the resources, partners, and progress that our industry has made so that we can learn and grow more together. There's a few other partners on this page that I've worked with over the past few years. You'll see haulers, you'll see material providers, you'll see packaging engineers, you'll see NGOs on this page. And again, like diversity of perspective, I cannot stress enough, because when you're a brand designing your packaging, you're working within your own silo. You have your own barrier requirements, you have your own branding guidelines, you're very structured in what you're working on. But ultimately, if we're not considering a composter's perspective in terms of actual recovery and not contaminating their compost streams, the due diligence of the material and the design is basically thrown out the window. So I would say collaborating is definitely the key to innovating faster, scaling our impact, and driving infrastructure shifts. But we want to make sure that all of those voices are heard, every piece of the supply chain, every piece of the value chain. So that means that you have to work like Recycle Colorado does with trade associations, advocacy groups, material experts, so that we can really, move the needle more together and raise all of the ships with that rising tide. Next. So this is what I'm really excited about. So at OSC2, we really focus on scaling, compostable, flexible films. We have two primary work streams where we focus on compostable flow wraps and stand-up pouches. You can see some of those materials here in this slide. And through collective purchasing power, through stakeholder collaboration, we've launched shared campaigns, Gone for Good and Leave No Trace, that correspond with new compostable material launches, allow us to really, embody that systems level approach that I talked about earlier, touching those 4 key points. We also do comparative studies where we've done climate studies, end of life studies, shelf life studies. And instead of a company paying $15,000 to do one for just their own, their own package and a few ingredients, our members pay less than, I think, $600 to all participate in these trials. And so again, we learn together, we share the costs together, and then we have a really robust packaging collaborative with about 60 members that span, like I said, composters, waste haulers, legislative aides, brands, packaging engineers, to really make sure we're identifying the key pain points and then strategically pushing forward to achieve our goals together. And these are actually in that previous slide, the packaging structures that you saw there were actual structures that were launched as a result of our shared trials and studies. Some projects that we're working on as a packaging formulation impact tool. So when I was at SFTA, we started to create this convoluted packaging buyer's guide that was an Excel spreadsheet, kind of hard to use. So instead of continuing to push forward on that on our own, we started working with some other experts in the space, including the Climate Collaborative and OSC2, to create something that was really user-friendly and that had value for your marketing manager who's trying to tackle packaging as a part of their role, or for an actual packaging research engineer who, can get a little bit more granular with the details. So we've been working on that this year. We plan to launch that next year. We just hosted the Redesigning Flexible Film Summit in partnership with Rainchild Design, which is one of the resource partners on the previous page. But we brought together 80 different participants, again, spanning that diverse stakeholder spectrum, and identified 8 different incubation projects that we're working on right now. So we have a policy project, a labeling project, consumer awareness. We're working on a field testing guideline project as well. And the idea is at the end of that session in December to have some open source resources to share and move the industry forward. And I already, I think, mentioned those shelf life studies, but we work with Clemson and Cornell. And so our members can really help to qualify different commercialized compostable materials through a really in-depth analysis of barriers, machinability, and obviously the due diligence around their distribution chain integrity. So we do this every year, and I think we've had, I want to say, just around 20 brands participate over the past 2 years. So moving forward on that. Next. And outside of my work with OSC2, I just wanted to mention a few other collaborative projects that are, in the works, because I think really what we need to talk about here is a portfolio approach to packaging. I'm working in compostables, but as some folks have mentioned, reusable, recyclable, recycled materials, these are all avenues to improve the sustainability of your packaging. So New Hope is working on a packaging toolkit that was actually launched as a result of that Flexible Film Summit. We work with the Climate Collaborative and TRIAC to do climate-based case studies for climate smart packaging. We're also working with Loop, which is a TerraCycle project. You know, it's leveraging that milkman model in terms of reusables to reduce plastic use. And then in terms of advocacy, we're working on a few different campaigns, one of which is with Californians Against Waste. Next. So, and next, what's next? I think, you know, packaging may seem like a daunting challenge, but again, where there's challenge, there's definitely opportunity. I like to end my presentations with a call to action. So to stay on top of the opportunities that we've talked about in terms of scaling sustainable packaging solutions, these are the things that I would recommend. You know, set forward-looking packaging goals, innovate around new structures and new materials, and really tap into those trade associations, working groups, NGO research to really find ways to move forward more than your company could on its own. Ensure consistency and clarity. Goes back to that messaging piece, shared messaging. And yeah, let's end it with the theme of collaboration, right? Because we have industry experts, we have diverse stakeholders, we have consumer insights and industry trends that are driving us towards more sustainable solutions. So let's use all of those to create systemic change and show that true business case for sustainability. Next. So, positive note, ending it on the future of packaging is really what we make of it. And I am so happy that I get to do this work and that I'm seeing so much progress and forward momentum. And I hope that we'll see some of you all join us. And I think that's it.
Perfect. We are running a little tight on time. So Alyssa, there are questions for you, but I will ask them at the end in our final 30 minutes. And we'll move right into Kaylyn's presentation.
Thanks, Kate. Can you guys hear me okay? Awesome. Like everyone else on this panel, I'm just super stoked to be here. I wish I could see you all in person and we could be enjoying a beer together over lunch. If your summit doesn't normally serve beer, then I think it should. So Ben, super happy to see that you shared that video with the beer cannabis collaboration. I love that so much. And the CO2 coming from fermented beer is so much cleaner than our other sources. So it is really my hope that we'll have more technologies like that that are accessible to small brewers in the future. So I'm Kaylyn. I'm calling in from Longmont, Colorado, and preferred pronouns are she and her. I'm the technical project coordinator at the Brewers Association, and I've been in the beer industry for about 6 years. My background is really in food science. So next slide, please. Just wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of the Brewers Association if you're not already familiar with us. So we are a nonprofit trade organization. We represent independent craft brewers across the United States. There are currently around 8,000 craft breweries in the US, and we have about 5,000 member breweries. We also have about 46,000 individual members that are part of the American Homebrewers Association. So it's a really big community of very passionate beer enthusiasts and business owners. So the Brewers Association, as a collective, we foster learning, we promote excellence in beer quality. We do this through events and resources. Not so many events this year. Unfortunately, we've been doing a lot of that virtually like we are today. We do have committee work in areas including government affairs, diversity, and technical brewing. So my area of work lies in that technical brewing category. We facilitate 6 technical subcommittees. Sustainability is one of them. But we also have areas of focus in quality, safety, engineering, draft beer quality, and supply chain. So while I am speaking on sustainability today, if I'm not able to answer your questions, because I'm more of a broad scope worker, and I'd be happy to dig a little deeper and get back to you on more details. Next slide, please. So how does beer fit in a circular economic model? Well, breweries have a lot of different opportunities to reach their individual sustainability goals. So like many other industries, these goals can be grouped by economic, environmental, and social aspects of the business. So in order for a brewery to be sustainable, it has to have financial stability. Profitability is a key objective there. For anyone who has ever visited a brew pub, you're probably well aware of the countless ways that breweries impact their local communities as small businesses. But the BA Technical Committee is really focused on more of that environmental work. So that's the area that I will largely be discussing today. These are things like farming practices for barley and hops, water and CO2 usage, and solid waste streams. Next slide. So we provide, as the Brewers Association, a lot of different industry working groups. Different members have lots of opportunities to connect and share information and resources that have helped them along in their sustainability journey. So a couple of the pictures here feature John Steer, one of our sustainability mentors, and he's been really instrumental in helping us get our sustainability resources put together. We have a benchmarking tool that is available to breweries. Right now we have about 500 craft breweries who are using this tool, and it's a really great way that they can kind of see where they fall amongst their peers in their utilities usage, CO2, and wastewater. So environmental stewardship is definitely a top priority for both craft brewers and craft beer enthusiasts. I don't have time to dive too deep into all of our resources today, but if you are interested, I encourage you to visit our website for more information or reach out to me directly. Next slide, please. So I put this slide up here just as a visual overview of a model circular economy. I know all of you in the audience at this point are probably very familiar. And I just wanted to point to the fact that the brewing industry is much like these other industries and how it might fit into this model. The goals are very much the same, and I think this is part of why we see so much industry collaboration across different industries. So I do think that beer is a great model for circularity. I think we've had maybe a little bit of a head start. Breweries historically have provided for their communities and the community for that local brewery. Technically speaking, beer is a farm-based beverage. It has been adding value to farmers' crops for centuries. Historically, it's provided sustenance to farm workers, and then it could be fed back into the farm through solid waste applied to the land or as feed. So we've really modernized this process to a large extent, but the point I'd like to make is that I think beer is a great model for circularity. Next slide, please. So before I give a few examples of this, I just wanted to go over some of the inputs and outputs for producing a beer. So brewers use water and power to feed into the product. We actually use a lot of water, but also this is used to drive processes like heating and cooling and cleaning equipment. CO2 can really be considered a raw ingredient since this is mostly used for injecting into the beer to provide that carbonation that we all love. There's also a number of raw materials that serve as ingredients or packaging. So the outputs for these are mostly brewery solid waste of spent ingredients like hops, malt, and yeast, and consumer waste of beer packages like aluminum, glass, or paperboard. Next slide. So one way that brewers have been able to add value to this waste is through spent grain materials. And this slide is an image of a brewer cleaning out cooked malt from the mash. And this is essentially a hot water infusion process. So the brewer took all the sugar, a lot of flavor out of that grain, but what's left behind is still really valuable. There's a lot of protein and fiber, and even some flavor remaining for other uses. So it's pretty common to see brewers working with their local farms to recover the spent grain and use it as feed. There's a lot of other creative ways the spent grain has been used. There's bakeries that use that for unique flavoring opportunities. there's actually a brewery in upstate New York that is using spent grains to feed the grub that feeds fish at a hatchery, which are then served at the restaurant on site. So that's a really awesome example of circularity right there. And it's not just an environmental sustainability initiative. It really saves brewers a lot of money since they don't have to pay for the costs associated with disposing all of that solid waste. You know, it's not pictured here, but yeast and hops are also sources of waste that can be diverted into food or feed. And this application of reusing that spent grain, it's not available to some breweries. It's, for example, if you're in a really densely populated urban area, you might not have a farmer at the ready to come collect that, but there are other opportunities to work with a local restaurant or a bakery. There are also other creative solutions to disposing the solid waste. Larger brewing facilities might have an anaerobic digester on site and then can use that to turn this waste into energy to run utilities at the plant. So we can both feed this back into the solid waste. We can feed it back into the system in a biological cycle, or it can be recovered and reused in other manufacturing processes. Next slide, please. So recyclable packaging, we definitely have this going for us. You know, this is the majority of how beer is sold, and recyclable could be glass bottle, an aluminum can, but it could also be returnable packaging. So things like we have refillable kegs, growlers, or returnable glass bottles. So typically beer is not packaged in plastic, but we have these recyclable or returnable packages. Returnable glass bottles are not as common in the US as they are in Latin America and Western Europe, but there are cooperative efforts happening to create returnable programs more at the local level here. So one example of this is the Oregon Beverage Recycling Cooperative, which works with a number of Oregon breweries to facilitate a returnable bottle program. So that's pretty awesome. And, you know, I think it can be applied to a lot of other local communities too. It just needs the right collaboration and infrastructure in place. So there's another packaging format, and Alyssa, I want to ask you about this because it is a number of big industry players that are looking to paper bottles. So I'm wondering if you can maybe talk about that in the Q&A later. I'm really curious as to see what the environmental impact of that new packaging material could be for beer. But when it comes down to it, the most environmentally friendly way to enjoy your beer is to ride your bike to the local pub and just drink it straight off the tap. Hopefully we can all do that again soon. Next slide, please. Okay, this is my shout out to EcoCycle and some of Kate's amazing work. So in addition to beer packaging, all of our brewing ingredients come in packages too. And this has been a bit of a pain point for my industry, particularly for smaller breweries who order smaller quantities that don't benefit from the economy of scale. So most large breweries are able to store the majority of their grain in silos. It's delivered on trucks. But a smaller brewery might accumulate a lot of these smaller grain bags. So EcoCycle, through a zero waste grant from Boulder County, partnered with Avery Brewing here in Boulder, Colorado, and embarked on a pilot project to improve recyclability of grain bags. The project focused on educating brewers on how to prep those bags for recycling by removing non-recyclable materials and providing some guidance on where to drop off the bags for recycling. And I think this is another great example of different industries working together towards circularity goals. So in the future, it's really my sincere hope that the hops industry can benefit from similar partnerships to improve those package waste streams. So Kate, if you have any ideas there, definitely looking to you for that. Something really cool that I just found out since we've been planning this talk is that the Hop Growers of America is currently looking into conducting the first life cycle analysis of hops in the United States. And so this could be really impactful. It's going to be a much longer term study, but it'll help brewers to really understand the greenhouse emissions coming from this particular ingredient and how that fits into their brewing process. Last slide, please. So the last point that I just want to touch on is we've put together a number of brewery-specific case studies. They're all on our website, brewersassociation.org, and they're under the Sustainability Resource Hub. So these are great resources for brewers or others in a similar beverage manufacturing industry who are really just looking to improve in areas of environmental sustainability. We're not here to help, we are here to help and to spread the word. So know that you're not in this alone. We need to take a holistic approach at solving these really big issues. Next slide. So that's it from me. Please reach out to me if you have any questions, want to learn more about brewery sustainability, or connect, have a beer. I really appreciate the invitation to be on this panel. Thanks EcoCycle, Recycle Colorado, and to all the attendees for your time and attention.
That was great. Thank you so much, Kaylyn. This wasn't asked by anybody else, but I'm asking it. What brewery is that with the grubs and the salt in upstate New York?
Yeah, it's actually a brewery, distillery, and winery. And Timberfish Technologies is that the manufacturer of that system.
That's awesome. We did get, we're running a little short on time, so I'm going to open it up to everybody, but I do have a quick question for you, Kaylyn, specifically about the shrink wrapped cans. One of the questions that came in said, recyclable, yes, but the shrink wrap cans are now causing an issue for recycling facilities. What's the Brewers Association doing to help educate the public about taking off the shrink wrap before depositing it in recycling? I'd also like to add on to that, what's the Brewers Association doing to look at alternatives to that shrink wrap?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question and a great point. It's something we've been monitoring. We're currently undergoing an investigation process with our sustainability committee and our supply chain committee just to decide the best way to communicate and message that, because many of our small brewers do utilize this shrink wrap packaging, and it is considered essential for their business. So we would like to have better solutions available to them. One that we're currently excited about is the option for digital printing, hoping that becomes more cost effective in the future. We do have some breweries that have tried to put an emphasis on educating their consumers if they are utilizing that shrink wrap package, and there are certain types of shrink wrap labels that are a little easier to remove for the consumer, so that could be a potential short-term strategy. But it is definitely, there's no like easy fix for it right now on the brewer's side, just because they're already facing so many supply chain issues in getting their hands on cans and labels. So we completely understand. We're definitely monitoring the situation and really thinking thoughtfully about how to message that out to our brewers and our community.
All right, just a quick reminder before we keep rolling on the questions, please use the Q&A feature down at the bottom of your screen. I might miss it if you put it in the chat. So just to make sure I get it, send it in the Q&A, please. Alyssa, this one's for you, and it kind of piggybacks off of the plastics question. If a ban on certain plastics occurs, would that help the cause of moving towards compostable packaging?
I mean, I think it depends on the way that the ballot initiative is structured. I know the Californians Against Waste ballot initiative that I referenced in my presentation, they focused, you can incorporate some sort of a producer responsibility bill or a producer responsibility tax or some sort of a financial incentive, like a carbon tax, where you can actually generate revenue to support the infrastructure programs that you need to see just in terms of scaling sustainable materials. So I would say so long as the policy accounts for that, and there is some sort of, especially now with everything that's happening with coronavirus and municipalities and the funding that they've received historically and what they have today, if you bring something in front of a legislator that costs money, it's probably a no-go. So you have to find ways, and this is something that the brands are doing too, and like working with Bricology and the USDA is trying to find pathways for funding where, you know, nonprofit and for-profit can come together in support of bringing forward a bill like that.
We had a question that was directed specifically to you, Alyssa, about TerraCycle, but I'd like to broaden the question a little bit. Specifically, it was regarding TerraCycle and wondering what you knew about what happens to actually what's in the boxes that go to TerraCycle. But I'd like to ask all of you, how do you actually strategically pick the partners that you're working with? Obviously, for associations, brewers are probably going to go to the Brewers Association. But beyond that, when we're talking about more diverse points of view.
Yeah. Well, and for me, you know, the first exposure I had to TerraCycle when I was at Justin's, and I was trying to find a short-term solution to minimize how much plastic packaging of ours was getting into the environment, understanding that our squeeze packs did not have a sustainable recovery solution. So I would say the TerraCycle recovery program, the one that you're talking about with the boxes, is not your long-term perfect solution, because again, they're typically downcycling it, to my knowledge. I mean, there's definitely programs that they have where you can take the excess packaging that you have at your manufacturing facility, or if you had to do some sort of a plate change, you can actually send it to them and they'll upcycle it into marketing materials that you can then use like with your employees and consumers. So they do have cool programs like that, and they also will upcycle it into different like playgrounds and structures and things like that with community impact projects. Those are the two that I'm most familiar with. But in terms of how I've worked with TerraCycle, it's really been through the Loop program, which is focused on reuse. So trying to create durable containers that, you know, really are focused on reducing your plastic through that model. And I think it just goes back to that portfolio approach for packaging. There's no one end-all be-all solution. In fact, many of the external packaging goals that you'll see that companies have delivered on or are working on, you know, say by 2025 will be recyclable, reusable, or compostable for our full portfolio.
So then again, opening that up to everybody else on the panel, how do you go about strategically picking partners and finding that diversity of perspective? Ben, you had spoken about that, not trying to put you on the hot seat, but you had spoken about that with all of the different community players that you have that you work with in the sustainability working group. Could you speak to that a little bit more?
Sure. I mean, you know, in cannabis, you wind up with a typically, I think, more narrow pool of options. Certainly with packaging, you know, we have child-proof requirements with they, you know, they call CR requirements, and you know, those are federal guidelines that have to be met. The state of Colorado follows another federal guideline regarding poison and how poisons have to be packaged and labeled, and that's how cannabis is treated in this state. So I think, again, this industry, we're looking at a much more narrow set of options, and so your diligence, you know, in any category is going to be really important, and I think here doubly so, because whoever you work with has really got to be on the ball. And again, as I said earlier, it's a compliance industry. So there are so many considerations, and a lot of those considerations do exist in beer and spirits as well. But frankly, the level to which those requirements go does not even come close to everything that is involved with cannabis. So it's challenging to say the least. And you know, just to add to that, with, you know, again, regarding packaging challenges with cannabis and the challenges around reuse and recycle, I mean, you have the existing infrastructure challenges that we all grapple with regarding how much plastic can really get recycled, what types of plastics are easy to recycle, how much energy and you know, waste has to go into doing that recycling, and how much efficacy it really has. And then the reuse issue is another thing that we've been discussing at the state level with the MED and with CDPHE, because again, with the child resistant requirements with cannabis, most of those products are certified for single use. So they're not certified to be opened and closed perpetually and then reused and put back into the supply chain. So we're working actually now with the state to try and get them to create some definition where they will say that, you know, some kind of common language that says, or basic language that says, you know, if it's still in good working condition, it could potentially be reused. Technically right now that's illegal, even if you wash it and totally scrub it and then try to resell it to a producer. That packaging product is technically no longer certified as child resistant because it's gone through a use cycle. So the challenges with our industry are really severe. And, you know, we've been banging on the drum specifically regarding packaging and labeling for several years. You know, there's some discussion now, very preliminary, and it would have to go through a legislative process to potentially remove some of those child safety requirements around the packaging of flower, because the raw material has to be activated in order to become a psychotropic drug. So there's I think a very rational argument that the raw flower product shouldn't have to be put into a child resistant package, which would eliminate a huge percentage of the plastic waste from the industry. But yeah, Kate, it is extraordinarily challenging in this industry.
So this is a question that's come up a couple of times. Grant, you guys are all like part of groovy associations, right? Your industry is pretty forward thinking and progressive. So how are you sharing framework like the Climate Action Corps with other industries that might be less mission driven by nature than what yours are? And then whoever wants to take it, kind of like give me a wave so I know who.
Yeah, that's a great question. You directed that at me, right, Kate? Just wanted to make sure.
I think
Okay.
it was originally you that was tagged on it, and I think opening it up to everybody. But yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's a great question, because I think the worst thing anyone can do is duplicate efforts, of course, right? So if you have one industry figure out XYZ over here, you want to be able to partner. And I know we have a lot of parallels, I'll say, too, with the Climate Collaborative, and have taken a lot of influence from their work and are talking at a very high level about how our programs can support each other. So just calling that out specifically, because I think they do a terrific job. But after we launched the Climate Action Corps, we definitely have heard from a number of industries. One in particular, the bike industry, expressed interest, and I think they already have, you know, shared values and inherent interest, obviously, in the environment. And, you know, for so many, it's an inherent mode to reduce emissions instead of using cars. So it really made sense for the bike industry to come on to this program. So we actually partnered, and I don't think we've announced this yet, so I'll announce it here, but we've partnered with People for Bikes as our first association partner. And so we're excited to welcome hopefully a ton of bike brands and manufacturers and suppliers and retailers to the Climate Action Corps in the coming year. And then we also, again, I guess I would say that we open up the Climate Action Corps for a number of different products and business types. So we have, you know, everything from kitchen and electronics and dog accessories. So not typical outdoor, but our guidance and the whole process of measuring and setting targets really is very similar. So we think this can be applicable for a lot of different companies. The note about sharing the framework, I think the process is probably already out there, you know, measuring your emissions, setting targets, reducing your emissions over time. I think the framework exists and it's out there. And for those who want to really dig in, you can go to the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. And unfortunately, it's hundreds and hundreds of pages of guidance, but there is a lot already out there. But as a nonprofit, you know, trying to support our members, we definitely have to charge for the Climate Action Corps, but in the scheme of working with a consultant alternatively, or doing your own life cycle assessment, or even taking on this work by yourself internally, it's a lot. And so Similar to, what Alyssa mentioned earlier, the whole program is really designed to make this work faster and cheaper and more efficient for companies. So hopefully once you kind of take a look at what it takes to join, you'll see how much you're getting by signing on. But yeah, People for Bikes will be coming on very soon, so stay tuned for that.
I can add to that a little bit. I just, in the chat, I gave a link to cannabispowerscore.org, which, Jesse, I sent you the wrong link before. It's Cannabis Power Score. It's a tool for cannabis companies to basically get a measure of their carbon footprint. It's done by friends of ours, a group based out of Portland, Oregon, called the Resource Innovation Institute. And the reason I bring it up here is it's similar in trying to help cannabis businesses get a grasp on what their carbon footprint looks like today. And then the second step is to go in and look at where efficiencies and improvements can be achieved. And that's part of what RII is doing. The other thing that I think is really exciting that touches right on your question, Kate, is RII is actually, I don't know if they've announced it, so I don't want to get too far, but they are going to be working with a federal agency to begin to collect this kind of data for all indoor agriculture in the United States. So here's another example where in the cannabis industry, we've developed this tool to begin to measure power, and it's being scaled and expanded to encompass any indoor agricultural production in the country, cannabis or otherwise, which I think is very exciting. And again, the group is the Resource Innovation Institute based up in Portland. So there's lots of cool stuff. And, just to touch quickly on the privacy and sharing thing, because that's another issue that RII has grappled with this. They give companies the option of participating anonymously or visibly. So companies can basically sign on to have their score shown to the world, or they sign on and say, we get to see our score and no one else. Some of that data does go into the aggregate, but it's anonymized. So I think there's lots of elegant solutions to that problem.
That's great. So here's a big thinking one. This is for all the panelists. Can you speak to the degree to which your industry collaboration efforts include working with zero waste educators on clear labeling for your packaging, so that the labeling industry, your labeling isn't industry specific, but starts to build towards recognizable labeling for consumers in general?
That's a tough one. I think it's something that hasn't fully been solved yet, but we're starting to see progress, and I think the consumers see the Mobius strip and they're like, I can recycle this, but really they don't understand that it's meant to indicate the polymer that's being used. And so we've discussed as a group at OSC how we need to move away from that, or come up with some sort of like color indicator or something that suits the purpose of the haulers and the waste managers, but doesn't confuse consumers at the same time. I would say like the Sustainable Packaging Coalition is usually what I refer back to. Their how to recycle and how to compost is probably one of the more robust labels that you can use on your packaging. There's obviously the third-party certified packaging, like the ASTM standards and things like that. But again, I don't think it's not an easy fix. And that's why one of those incubation projects that was launched from our Flexible Film Summit is oriented around developing a framework for better labeling. And we're starting with compostable. And we also, it's in the same way where when you're trying to certify organic, you have a 3-year transition period. So how can we create a labeling system that not only clarifies things for consumers, but also rewards brands and incentivizes them with some sort of marketing recognition that says, yes, we're plant-based, yes, we're bio-based, something along those lines. So if anyone has any ideas beyond those suggestions, I am all ears.
Anybody else want to hop onto that question?
I guess I would say, just echoing what Alyssa shared, we've actually referenced the Sustainable Packaging Coalition as well. They're the specialist in the space, and so it makes sense for them to really hold that guidance. So in terms of alignment, we've brought them in to speak and provided their resources and their white papers to our members. And I think what's unique about the outdoor industry, obviously it encompasses so many different types of product. And so I think the biggest challenge that we're hearing for the outdoor industry perspective is one, poly bags, which I know Kate knows well. And we've had long conversations about that, but some brands are starting to work together on establishing systems for that, Prana being one of them. And then the second thing is just ensuring that the packaging is appropriate for the product, and can you reduce waste, reduce just sheer materials for packaging a snowboard or a bike or really large products that obviously need a high level of protection, especially based on their price point, but can you reduce the package overall weight and the material use? And I think there's significant learnings there. But again, we also reference the Sustainable Packaging Coalition for a lot of that.
We also look at that as a resource. And again, the challenges for our industry are really severe on this front. And so if there are any moms out there in the audience listening, one of the things that this industry here in Colorado and really every legal jurisdiction could do is to eliminate the child resistant requirements on flour. Because if you think about, like if you look at the market data, which I do, there's a huge amount of volume of pre-rolls that get sold, and they all go out in basically the same plastic tube. And those things, they're usually number 5 recycling, which, you know, you can throw into your recycling, and then you get back into the question of how our recycling infrastructure works and how the average consumer is really able to access that. But we're not going to do that today. But you know, from an advocacy perspective, it's very difficult for this industry to come out and say, we don't want child-resistant packaging on our flour, because people will lose their minds and say, what about the kids? So it's a tough position for industry folks to be in, because again, we're a compliance industry above everything else. And the rules are, you have to be in a child-resistant package. So I would say, you know, for consumers and for advocates and for even government regulators in the audience, you know, we think that this is a really important area where we can drastically reduce waste in cannabis. And one of the things that I personally find very important and trying to emphasize in all of these meetings that I participate in is that Colorado, you know, has a shrinking window of time where we're going to continue to be a thought leader as a cannabis market, because frankly, California is going to drown everybody, just sheer numbers. And then New York and Florida and all these bigger states. But as long as Colorado continues to be on the forefront of sensible regulation, markets will continue to look at us. And I think, again, this is an area where this industry can drastically eliminate a ton of plastic that is going into landfills and God knows where else, simply by changing the rules. So that's the end of my soapbox.
That's great. We have time for one more quick question. Let's see which one. So Jesse, can you comment on the potential to transform business models in the outdoor products industry toward reuse?
Yes, I love this question. Thank you for asking it, William. You know, I actually would say that a lot of it is already going on. And I would just call out, obviously, you know, online marketplaces like the origin of like Craigslist and eBay. We're already kind of used to accessing clothing and items through that way. And we're starting to see outdoor gear obviously being, I guess, exchanged through those platforms, but obviously also through things like, you know, ThreadUp and Poshmark and Real, which are fashion focused, but we're seeing a lot of outdoor apparel specifically through those sites as well. And then we actually just had a new member join the Climate Action Corps called Gear Trade, which is focused on an online marketplace for used gear. And we're seeing a lot of retailers like REI experiment, of course, with their their online garage, their REI garage for reused gear. And so it's already happening, I guess. And I would say, I think the more retailers obviously that come into this space, the more that brands are able to participate and have markets to sell through. But I would just add also that other circular models like repair and re-commerce are also really critical to keep that product in use should something happen. And so There's companies like the Renewal Workshop in Hood River, Oregon, that partners with brands like the North Face to renew their apparel and kind of create newly designed items from used garments that couldn't be used. And obviously a lot of people are familiar with the Patagonia Worn Wear as another great example of kind of a new business model to keep product in use. And then the last one, just with re-commerce too, is there's companies behind the scenes like Trove who are helping brands resell their product through their own brand website. So there's a lot of it going on, and I would say that I think once measurement starts to come into play, when we can start to better identify how keeping a product in use and repairing it and getting as many customers to use one product as possible, once we can better quantify those benefits, I think we'll start to see more companies willing to invest in those spaces because it will reduce their impact. So I think measurement is also key and hopefully coming more into fruition soon.
So that is it for our session. It went by incredibly fast. I want to thank all of our panelists, Ben, Kaylyn, Alyssa, Jesse. Thank you guys so much. You've been amazing to work with. And also a shout out to Adam Hill and Tenzin Tashi, the ones who are behind the curtain, making sure this went so smoothly. It's been wonderful working with you all. We learned a lot. And look forward to seeing everybody and connecting through the rest of the summit. Please, to everybody in the audience, don't hesitate to reach out to all the folks that were on this panel. They have so much information to share. You're not in it alone. They can help you find your community. And also shout out, EcoCycle can help you with that as well as Recycle Colorado too. So don't hesitate to reach out and have a great rest.